Nori Amaya, co-owner of a popular Washington, D.C. restaurant, was a vibrant presence known for her love of salsa dancing, a passion that earned her the nickname the Salsa Queen. On Halloween night 2009, 38-year-old Nori was in her element. She spent the evening salsa dancing at some of DC's hottest Latin clubs, dressed in a black evening gown and even wearing a festive masquerade mask adorned with peacock feathers. But just 2 days later, that lively spirit was extinguished in the most chilling way. Nori's family found her strangled in her own bed, in what has become one of the capital's most haunting unsolved crimes. Nori Amaya was a well-known figure in DC's nightlife and culinary scene. She co-owned Copy's Organic Restaurant, a cozy Italian eatery, with her brother Carlos. Friends and patrons described Nori as warm and full of life, the kind of person who would greet customers with a hug and make them feel at home. Outside of work, her greatest passion was salsa dancing. By October 2009, Nori was juggling long hours running the restaurant with her nightly dance outings. October 31st, 2009 was a rainy Saturday in DC, but Nori was determined to enjoy the Halloween festivities. She worked an early shift at Copy's that day, then shared a bottle of wine with her brother at the restaurant's bar before heading out close to midnight. Dressed for a masquerade and excited to dance, Nori made a circuit of her favorite clubs that night. First, she stopped by a DuPont Circle nightclub and then Rumba Cafe, a spot owned by Gustavo Huapala, a man she had been dating. According to later accounts, Nori wasn't her usual upbeat self at Rumba Cafe. Behind her mask, she appeared sad and even asked Gustavo to sit with her, but he was busy working the crowded Halloween party. Feeling upset, Nori slipped out without saying goodbye. From there, she took a taxi to Bravo Bravo, a downtown salsa club, where she met up with her regular dance partner, Israel Salamanca. Normally, Nori might dance the night away, but that night she cut the outing short, reportedly leaving after only about 15 minutes. It was unusual for Nori to leave the dance floor so early, and reportedly she was even seen in tears as she departed the club. Israel escorted Nori to a taxi and watched her ride away, not realizing he'd be the last friend to see her alive. Around 2:30 a.m. in the early hours of November 1st, Nori arrived back at her apartment building, a large complex called the Woodner. If you're one of those people who just listens, you may want to check out the security footage now, as I'm talking about it. That said, there's absolutely nothing earth-shattering in this footage, and it's perhaps paradoxically more interesting for the fact that there's nothing unusual about it. Security camera footage from the lobby captured her entering the building alone. The video shows Nori pausing to speak briefly with someone at the front desk before checking her mailbox and heading toward the elevators. Because it was Halloween night, the lobby was bustling with costumed party-goers returning home, but Nori appeared to be by herself, and no one obvious was following her. That grainy early clip of Nori stepping into the Woodner would be the last known sighting of her. What happened after she reached her 11th floor apartment remains a mystery. Notably, Nori's cell phone did not make it home with her. The next day, a cab driver found her phone left behind in his taxi and turned it in. As a result, when family and friends tried to contact Nori on Sunday, they got no answer. However, those close to her weren't immediately alarmed. Her brother Carlos assumed she might be sleeping off a hangover from Halloween night, but as Sunday turned into Monday with still no word from Nori, concern began to set in. By Monday, November 2nd, Nori Amaya had failed to show up for work at the restaurant for 2 days in a row, an absence that was very out of character. That morning, Carlos Amaya decided to check on his sister in person. He drove to the Woodner and went up to Nori's apartment, but got no response when he knocked. Oddly, he found the door locked, which struck him as strange because Nori often left her door unlocked out of habit, at least during the daytime. Thinking she might simply be sleeping inside, Carlos left, only to return later that evening with their younger sister and a building security guard to get access. Around 9 p.m. on Monday night, the guard unlocked Nori's apartment door, and the siblings entered with a sense of dread. The apartment was dark and quiet, and as they crept into the bedroom and switched on a light, a horrific scene confronted them. Nori was lying lifeless on her bed. Someone had covered her body with her bed sheets or a comforter, almost as if to cloak the crime. It was immediately clear she had been the victim of foul play. Carlos later recalled the jarring moment he realized his sister was dead, crying out as the gravity of the situation flowed over him all at once. The arriving police and paramedics arrived immediately and confirmed Nori was deceased. The scene was officially declared a slaying, and she was found to have been strangled. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was yet to come, something that deeply unsettled even veteran detectives. All 10 of Nori's fingernails had been meticulously cut off. Investigators at the scene were shaken by that bizarre detail. The removal of a victim's fingernails is extraordinarily unusual, and was clearly done intentionally by the perpetrator. Detectives immediately theorized why. Nori had struggled against her attacker. She might have clawed at them and trapped critical DNA evidence under her nails. By cutting off her nails post-mortem, the perp was likely trying to eliminate any chance of forensic evidence under her fingertips. It was a chilling sign that this predator was both calculated and cold-blooded. DC Metropolitan Police launched an intensive investigation into Nori's slaying, but from the outset the case presented perplexing challenges. At the crime scene, detectives found minimal physical evidence. There were no obvious signs of forced entry into the apartment, and no indication of theft. Nori's wallet, credit cards, and other valuables were reportedly untouched. This suggested that robbery was not the motive, and it raised the likelihood that Nori knew the perpetrator and had willingly let them into her home. Indeed, Nori's family firmly believed she would never open her door in the middle of the night to a stranger, especially since she was security conscious living in a big complex. Notably, while Nori was known to leave her door unlocked, as I had previously mentioned, reports imply that this was only something she did during the day. The fact that the door was found locked when Carlos first visited is also puzzling. With no broken locks or forced doors, the initial profile was that the culprit was likely someone in Nori's circle, or at least someone who didn't raise her suspicions. Investigators did uncover one crucial piece of evidence from Nori's body. Despite the nail-clipping ploy, they managed to retrieve an unknown male DNA profile from the scene. The police haven't publicly disclosed where this DNA was found, but it could have been from touch DNA on her clothing or skin. This genetic clue was immediately run through national law enforcement databases, but it didn't match any existing offender profiles. With the DNA unidentified, detectives began collecting voluntary DNA samples from the men in Nori's life. Over the next months, more than 20 individuals who had interacted with Nori were tested, and one by one, each one was ruled out. Meanwhile, detectives meticulously reviewed the surveillance footage from the Woodner apartment complex on the night of Nori's slaying. Unfortunately, because it was Halloween, the video proved to be more frustrating than fruitful. The lobby tapes showed a parade of residents and guests in costumes, many wearing masks, wigs, or face paint, making it extremely difficult to recognize individuals. Investigators couldn't definitively pick out any suspect trailing Nori in that late-night crowd. The surveillance footage essentially hit a dead end due to the Halloween disguises. Police noted that one personal item was missing from Nori's apartment, but they've kept tight-lipped about what that item is. This detail has been deliberately withheld from the public to keep it as knowledge only known to the perpetrator and investigators. If a so-called tipster was to report something related to this item, for instance, it would raise an immediate red flag to intensively investigate that person. Despite extensive police work, the investigation stalled in the absence of a clear suspect. The baffling nature of Nori Amaya's slaying has led to extensive speculation about who could have done it and what the motive might have been. Investigators themselves lean strongly toward the theory that Nori knew the perpetrator. The combination of no forced entry and the apparent comfort the perp had to spend time altering the scene suggests a personal connection, at least according to investigators. Further, there was the fact that her body was covered in a blanket. Criminologists often note that when a victim's body is covered, it can indicate the perpetrator felt remorse for what they had done. One early focus of the investigation was Nori's tumultuous love life. In the months leading up to her death, Nori had been involved with Gustavo Huapala, the Rumba Cafe owner. That relationship had its stresses. Nori had even confided to her brother that she didn't see a future with Gustavo. She also complained about the difficulty of finding a good man and feeling lonely despite her vibrant social life. Some wondered if a jealous lover, ex-partner, or even a scorned romantic rival could have been involved. Notably, there was an odd incident where someone claiming to be Gustavo's wife called Nori at her restaurant shortly before her slaying. But here's the thing. Gustavo wasn't married anymore, and his ex-wife denied ever making the call. Detectives eventually dismissed that strange phone call as an unrelated prank, and Gustavo himself was cleared. Gustavo's account and others placed him elsewhere during the critical hours, and police have stated they do not consider him a suspect. Further, he voluntarily gave a DNA sample and voluntarily submitted to a polygraph and was fully cooperative with the investigation. But I want to come back to that weird phone call for a moment before we move on. This call seems very odd to me, though, and I do have to question if the actual perpetrator may have put someone up to making the call. It suggests to me that there was someone out there who may have wanted to break up Gustavo and Nori, or at least put some significant doubts into Nori's mind. That suggests to me that this unknown caller may offer a substantial clue, which should perhaps have been investigated more thoroughly. That said, it's an active and ongoing investigation, so it's possible that investigators saying it isn't related is actually an investigative tactic in and of itself. With known friends and boyfriends ruled out, attention shifted to other possibilities. The Woodner is an enormous complex, home to roughly 2,000 people, and has its own security staff and maintenance crews. An insider with knowledge of the building might have known of Nori, or even interacted with her casually. Nori was outgoing and might have made acquaintances in the elevators or lobby. It's conceivable someone living there developed an unhealthy fixation on her. Such a person could easily follow her to her door without standing out, especially on Halloween night, and might know about her habit of leaving the door unlocked. Online sleuths have speculated about the role of a security guard or other staff, since they had access to master keys and would understand the surveillance system. However, no evidence pointing to a specific employee has ever been made public. It remains an open question whether the perp had legitimate access to the building or was an intruder who tailgated in behind someone else that night. And that's another important factor to mention here since it was Halloween. This would have been the ideal time for anyone to tailgate into the Woodner, despite the usual security. There is also the grim possibility of a serial predator who saw an opportunity. The Halloween timing, being inconvenient for surveillance, could have been less than coincidental. Investigators haven't linked Nori's case to any others, but the fact that her fingernails were removed suggests the attacker may have at least been an aspiring serial offender. At this point, though, in my view, it's only a matter of time before the perpetrator is caught and there's justice for Nori and her family. For regular viewers, the fact that there's DNA on this cold case and all leads have dried up probably means you know what I'm going to discuss next. Genetic genealogy could be the key to finally cracking this case wide open. Traditional forensic DNA testing has already produced an unidentified male DNA profile from the crime scene, which is an extremely valuable lead. While this DNA hasn't matched any entries in law enforcement databases, that doesn't mean the suspect is untraceable. This is where genetic genealogy comes in. Unlike traditional DNA matching, which looks for exact matches in criminal databases, genetic genealogy uses consumer DNA data to identify potential relatives. By comparing the unknown DNA to thousands of samples submitted by ordinary people researching their family trees, genealogists can build out family lines. If the person responsible has any biological relatives who submitted their DNA to a genealogy site, the net can then close. Using this process, they can eventually narrow the possibilities down to a small number of individuals, often even to just one person. From there, investigators can obtain a sample of the suspect's DNA, often surreptitiously, and confirm the connection prior to making an arrest. It's not clear to me at present if Nori's case has been referred out for genetic genealogical testing. Given that her family is so involved in advocating for her, though, I speculate that it's only a matter of time before this is done. I hope that the next time I mention Nori's case, it'll be in an update segment talking about how the perpetrator has been brought to justice. Valentine's Day is usually a time for love and hope, but in 1978 it delivered something much darker. On that morning, a jogger made a gruesome discovery along a lonely road in Otay, California: the partially burned body of a teenage girl. The shocking find left authorities with a nameless victim and almost no clues, a mystery that remains unsolved decades later. She was small in build, around 5'1" and under 90 pounds, and wore blue denim overalls with a floral-patterned white top, and notably, she had no shoes or socks on her feet. She was noted to be somewhere in her middle to late teen years, with the identification of her age being potentially hindered by her small stature. The girl had brown hair tied in a ponytail, and her right ear was slightly malformed, a distinctive detail that could have helped identify her if someone had reported her missing. The medical examiner estimated she had been deceased for about 2 days before the discovery. Investigators noted more disturbing clues. Her body had been set on fire after death, with most of the burns concentrated on her torso, while her face and limbs remained unscathed. In fact, the charring was heaviest around her lower abdomen, and her fingertips were burnt, likely an effort by the perpetrator to destroy evidence or hinder identification. They also observed the girl's left eye was swollen shut, her left cheek was bruised, and a front tooth was cracked in half. This indicated she had been beaten, perhaps over a prolonged period. An autopsy toxicology screen revealed a lethal amount of the painkiller Demerol in her body. Investigators concluded this overdose was the likely cause of death, firmly establishing the case as a slaying by poisoning. The medical examiner also noted the girl had extensive dental work, including a fairly recent root canal, which indicated she had received good dental care during her life. Investigators compared her dental records against missing persons databases, but found no match. Given the good state of her dental care, the authorities expected to be able to at least identify the girl quickly, but unfortunately, this wouldn't be the case. The crime received little media coverage in 1978, just a brief mention in a local paper, so it didn't generate many tips from the public. Later efforts to spark recognition, such as releasing an updated facial reconstruction in 2014 and highlighting the case in media, also brought no breakthroughs. Unfortunately, all sources list that no DNA is available in the case, and it's unclear where her remains presently are, but I'll get back to that in a moment. A number of theories have been proposed in this case. Some suggest the perpetrator was someone in the victim's life, possibly a family member or caregiver. If she came from an unstable home, it's conceivable that her own parent or guardian administered the fatal poisoning and then dumped her body, never reporting her missing. This would explain why no one came forward to identify her. The very people who should have sought her were responsible for her death. However, some have suggested the fact that she had good extensive dental work is contrary to this claim. After all, it does seem unlikely that a family who was treating their daughter in such a cruel way would at the same time be paying for extensive dental treatments. Another possibility is that she was a runaway or transient hitchhiker who fell prey to a dangerous individual on the road. In the 1970s, many teens hitchhiked, and some unfortunately encountered violent predators. The Otay Jane Doe could have left home voluntarily and then met someone who ultimately administered the lethal dosage. The brutal but hasty nature of the crime, signs of beating, an overdose, and a clumsy attempt to burn the evidence, suggests an impulsive act rather than a well-planned act. If she was far from her hometown, it would also make it harder to link her to any missing persons report. Another theory suggests that she may have fallen into a trafficking ring and been moved as far away from her home state as possible. Under this theory, she was perhaps a runaway who was taken advantage of. This theory explains why she had good dental care, and also why no one came forward to report her missing locally. It's very possible that another parallel case exists somewhere for this missing teenager under her actual name. Like with many cold cases such as this, that haven't received much attention at all, it's possible that word of the Otay Jane Doe simply hasn't reached the right people. Perhaps the next steps to bringing justice in this case would be to exhume her body, if it exists, and send her remains off to a state-of-the-art forensic laboratory. If a DNA sample can be obtained, genetic genealogy could locate this teenager's parents. Given the situation, it's possible that locating the parents could solve both her identity and the crime itself. As for now, the Otay Jane Doe remains one of the numerous unidentified victims of crime for whom justice has been so elusive. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with that regular reminder to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Also check out the Patreon if you want to support my work further, and also get your name on the shout-out page. In April 2019, a bush plane droned over the vast subarctic wilderness of Canada's Northwest Territories. Far below, a lone figure and 3 dogs stood beside a remote campsite on the shore of Rolfe Lake. The pilot's passing glimpse of this isolated camp would be the last time anyone saw 63-year-old Glenn Field alive. Glenn was an experienced outdoorsman, a loner who fully embraced life in the wild. He had moved to the Northwest Territories in 2018, determined to make the bush his permanent home. In the fall of that year, he had a charter plane drop him off at Rolfe Lake. This is a remote area only accessible by plane about 100 miles northeast of Yellowknife, the only city in this isolated region. He was dropped off along with his 3 German Shepherd dogs and enough provisions to last the winter. He understood the dangers. Decades earlier, Glenn had lost several toes to frostbite during a solo winter expedition. Nonetheless, he remained determined to live off the land. Indeed, he endured the brutal winter of 2018 to 2019. A passing pilot spotted Field and his dogs at the lakeside camp in April 2019, confirming he was alive and well as the ice began to thaw. Sometime after that April 2019 sighting, Glenn Field vanished without a trace. He never arrived back in Yellowknife, nor did he make his usual periodic check-ins with acquaintances in town as the summer passed. When Field failed to appear or contact anyone by the fall of 2019, those who knew him grew alarmed. The RCMP were alerted, and on October 11, 2019, police issued a public appeal for any information on Field's whereabouts. A missing person investigation was soon underway in the unforgiving terrain where he was last seen. Searchers eventually reached Glenn's campsite later in 2019, only to find it deserted. The camp was neatly packed up, with no garbage or personal items left behind. Just a few tree stumps remained as evidence that he had been there. Nothing indicated when he had left or which direction he went. Crucially, Field's gray canoe was gone, along with all his gear, including his tent, axe, rifle, and his satellite phone. The 3 dogs he arrived with were also nowhere to be found, and there was no trace of them either. As mentioned, he had carried a satellite phone for emergencies, yet no distress call was ever sent from it. All signs suggested he had set off on his planned journey home, but somewhere along the way something had gone very wrong. Despite extensive search efforts, no clear trace of Field was found in the vast wilderness. In the summer of 2020, RCMP conducted further aerial searches and urged anyone traveling in the area to watch for any sign of Field's equipment or dogs. On August 24, 2020, searchers did discover some scattered equipment believed to belong to him near Rolfe Lake. However, there was still no sign of Glenn himself, nor of his canoe or the German shepherds. With no leads to follow, active search operations were called off in late 2020, leaving the mystery unresolved. The leading theory is that Glenn Field met with a fatal accident during his journey back toward civilization. His brother, Wayne Field, believes Glenn likely capsized his canoe while trying to trek back to Yellowknife with the dogs. A drowning in frigid, wind-swept waters could have taken his life in an instant, even given his expertise. Such a mishap would also explain why neither Glenn, nor his canoe, nor any of the 3 dogs were ever found. Another possibility is that he succumbed to an injury or exhaustion on land before he could find help. He had skis with him to traverse spring ice and snow, so it's conceivable he fell through ice or was hurt while portaging between lakes. Alone in the bush, any serious misfortune could turn deadly without anyone to rescue him. There is no evidence of foul play in this case, and given the remoteness of the area, that scenario is highly unlikely. However, that hasn't stopped speculation that a human predator could have seen this isolated man as a viable target. That said, Glenn was fairly heavily armed, and also had 3 tough dogs with him, so he wouldn't have been an easy target. The presence of his 3 German shepherds would have made it difficult for anyone to ambush him, given the dogs would have been alerted to any camp intruder by scent alone. The authorities also investigated whether he disappeared intentionally to start a new life. Glenn Field was, by all accounts, a bit of an unusual guy to say the least, so him packing it all up and trekking to a new location isn't impossible. He's also the sort of person who would go out of contact with absolutely everyone in his life for extended periods. However, after extensive investigations and following some leads in British Columbia and Canada, the authorities turned up no trace of him and ruled out the idea. In the end, it appears to me that the simplest explanation is the most likely in this scenario, and he very likely had an accident and perished. Glenn took a big risk by heading out into the wilderness alone, and as a very experienced woodsman, he was aware of these challenges. We don't know exactly what the travel corridor was for Glenn's trip back to Yellowknife, but the city is exactly 93 miles from Lake Rolfe. Let's assume for a moment that the travel corridor width was 30 miles, given that there are no trails whatsoever in this area. This would mean that the authorities would have had to investigate approximately 3,000 square miles of densely forested terrain for any sign of Glenn. Putting the math aside for a moment, finding any concrete evidence of Glenn was a virtually impossible task for investigators. This was compounded by the fact that no one even knew when he disappeared for certain. That said, of course, all this ambiguity could be seen to be in favor of the non-accident related theories as well, but Occam's razor definitely applies in this situation. That said, the accident theory does leave some unanswered questions, like why he never used his satellite phone to send a distress call. In my view, this can likely be best explained by a sudden accident on the water, where there would be no opportunity to make any sort of call. In April 2022, 3 years after he disappeared, a Yellowknife court found Glenn to be legally deceased. Officially, however, the RCMP still consider the case open until concrete proof of Glenn's fate is discovered. The vast wilderness may forever hold its secrets. Field's final resting place could lie at the bottom of a lake, or somewhere lost in those woods, never to be found.